If someone breaks into your home, you absolutely have the right to defend yourself. The law may vary from state to state, but ultimately, if you fear for your life, if you are in genuine danger from an intruder, you can defend yourself. But the question will be asked, was the threat real? Or was it all an elaborate ruse to commit murder? This is the headlining question for this particular case, and there is ultimately a definitive answer. Hello, true crimers, and welcome back to the podcast. Hopefully, this is all running smoothly ish now, but I know I will still need to tweak things here and there. I added light background music to the past couple episodes. I won't do that again. I think I do that because I personally hate dead air behind my voice. It's like my version of white noise. I always add background music in my TikToks because I think it sounds awkward in silence, but I've learned that a lot of folks prefer it that way, quietness behind a person's voice when it comes to podcasts and even YouTube videos. So I won't do that anymore. Okay. Well, at any rate, enough of that. Let's just get into the story of today. This is the case of Dustin Wehde. Viewer discretion is advised. It's December 13th, 2001. We are still reeling as a country post 9/11. The attacks happened just 3 months prior, and most of us were still on edge. But in the months following the terrorist attacks, whenever a major crime happened, I've noticed in other cases like this, similar ones, that urgency seemed to change in terms of getting to the bottom of said crime. Like we have this mentality of, well, we have bigger fish to fry right now instead of like actually investigating these individual murders. I think it also just varied from city to city. I don't know if you know what I mean, but the world was just significantly different at that point in our history. But it was the evening hours of December 13th, 2001 in Early, Iowa. That's the name of the city, Early. Population in 2001 or so was roughly 600, maybe 700 people. And today, from what I can tell, it's still under 1,000 people. So it's probably pure chaos when this small community is suddenly open to a possible murder investigation, home invasion case, what have you. But that's what happened. 11-year-old Burt Roberts makes a terrified call to 911 to report a shooting in his home. His mother, 35-year-old Tracy Roberts, had shot an intruder inside their house. The little boy was screaming, he was scared and panicking, and when police arrive, they see Tracy and her three kids, who I believe were in the kitchen, which was the only room in the house that had a light on at that time. They were clearly very distraught and scared, and inside the home on the second floor in a bedroom, they find the body of a 20-year-old man, and his name was Dustin Wehde. Dustin Brett Wehde was born on August 1st, 1981. He was born in Storm Lake, Iowa, and he was born to Brett and Ramona Wehde. He also had two sisters. He would eventually graduate from Schaller Crestland Community School, I believe it's pronounced, in May of 2000. In high school, he was a member of the student council and a participant in Gulf and Civil Air Patrol. Dustin was big into family. He had a really close bond with his siblings. He was close with his parents. He also loved his friends dearly, despite him being a bit of a reserved guy, it sounds like, who kind of kept to himself a lot. A quiet loner, as some have described him as being. He was really into like computers and anything to do with electronics. After all, in 2001, when this all happened, there was still a whole lot of new technology coming into focus. So there was a lot of things to look into and be a fan of if you're into that kind of thing. He spent time, outside of that, listening to music, playing video games. He also liked to go paintballing with friends and family. His mom said that while Dustin had become more withdrawn in recent years, he still had a very big heart. He was still a good guy in the end. Dustin had connections to Tracy Roberts, the woman who actually ends up taking his life. Tracy's husband, Michael Roberts, owned and operated a successful computer business, and Dustin, being computer savvy, was actually hired by Michael to do work for this particular business, which was being run out of the Roberts house. Tracy, after the shooting, would actually refer to Dustin as a socially awkward and creepy guy, that she never felt comfortable with Dustin in the house without other people there, especially her husband. Kind of basically painting him as an unsavory person. Tracy Roberts said that she was home with the three kids on that Thursday night. It was around 7-ish or so. Her husband, Michael, was out of town on a business trip, which was later confirmed and verified. Her kids were 11, 3, and 1 years old at the time. She says that suddenly, Dustin Wehde and another man just burst through the front door and grabbed her. She claims one of them took a pair of pantyhose and wrapped them around her neck and choked her until she passed out. The pantyhose had actually been hers. They were draped over the staircase before the intruder used them on her. But the next thing she knows, she comes to and she sees her 11-year-old son, Bert, holding a baseball bat and screaming, trying to protect his young siblings. Tracy says she then runs to her room, goes to their safe, puts in the combination, and she does so with the intent to get the two guns that are inside that safe. But as she did so, she claims that Dustin Wehde runs up behind her, grabs her by the hair, pulls her back, and at that point, she already has her 9mm in her hand, which she says she pulls the trigger, but the safety was still on. But then she quickly turns the safety off and she fires the gun right at Dustin. She then says she grabs her 357 and sees Dustin trying to move, and at this point is when Bert is already calling 911, in which a gunshot, I believe, can faintly be heard in the background. The shot was fired by Tracy into the back of Dustin's head as he was already on the ground. Dustin had been shot by Tracy 9 times by 2 different guns. Meanwhile, the second intruder, who had dark curly hair, according to Tracy, managed to escape. He was never found. The second intruder was never witnessed or seen by anybody else other than Tracy. Tracy Roberts, of course, was a hero. She was the mother who fought off home invaders and protected her kids by shooting the would-be assailant. She was quickly painted as the small-town hero who did what she needed to do to protect her family. And by all rights, she was allowed to do this. Her life was threatened. The kids' lives were threatened. These intruders broke into the home. Self-defense is and was her right. She even had the markings around her throat to show that she was, in fact, strangled by those pantyhose. This was an incredibly brave mother. But was she really? Tracy Roberts was a well-liked mom enough, I guess, in the area. All the moms knew her. She seemed to be sweet and kind. She loved her children. She was always helping with activities related to the kids. She was a soccer mom through and through. Her first son, Bert, though, was not Michael Roberts' child, her current husband. In 1988, Tracy married a man named John Pittman, who was actually a doctor. Soon after, Bert was born, but the marriage turned sour, and they end up divorcing. And this was not a clean divorce. Very far from it. John Pittman had learned that his wife, Tracy, was cheating on him, and he confronted her about this. How does she respond? Totally normal, right? Nope. She responds by claiming John was molesting their little boy, Bert, which then leads to an incredibly tumultuous divorce and a criminal investigation in which John Pittman was able to successfully prove that Tracy lied her ass off about the molestation claims. It was not true. She did so to secure the custody of Bert, which backfired on her. There was a custody agreement that was later put in place for John to still see his son. Now, right after all of this happens, Tracy meets Michael Roberts. The two of them then end up getting married and having 2 kids of their own. Michael ends up starting this computer business out of their home. He also has another job, I believe. And eventually he hires this quiet neighborhood kid named Dustin to help with this business, which then takes us back to the night of the home invasion. So there is a car parked in front of the Roberts home that Tracy says is not hers. It's actually Dustin's car. It's the one parked out front. In the car, the only real evidence they actually find is this little pink spiral notebook. The handwriting was Dustin's, confirmed by both experts and also his own mother. Entries in this notebook clearly state that Dustin was hired to stalk and eventually kill Tracy and her son, Bert. The initials JP were found throughout the writings. JP would possibly stand for John Pittman, Tracy's ex husband. So now, to investigators, it looks as if John Pittman hired Dustin Wehde to murder his ex wife and the son he fought so hard to get custody of. Police now have to look into him. But his alibi puts him way far away. They have no phone records showing he ever spoke to Dustin Wehde, nothing in Dustin's phone records or John's, no email correspondences, no written mail, no money ever left John's accounts that was later found in Dustin's accounts, even in like small increments. There was nothing. No paper trail, no physical trail, no evidence. He also stated that he had never spoken to Dustin ever in his life. He didn't even know who he was. So all they really had was just this kid's handwriting suggesting JP was involved. But eventually, John Pittman was cleared as a suspect. Michael Roberts, who stood by his wife, even doing like mainstream interviews like on the news and also in shows like Montel Williams, stood by her, but was also cleared as a suspect. And this is all in terms of being the person who potentially organized this apparent hit job on this soccer mom, and also clears them of being the potential second intruder. Police, though, they decide to keep this pink notebook a secret, a top secret, if you will. They reveal nothing about it to the press or the public. There's no mention of its existence whatsoever. They don't tell Tracy, they don't tell Tracy's husband, they don't tell anyone in Dustin's life. They tell nobody about this notebook. This is because at least one other person has to know about it, according to police, is what they would think. And if that person slips and says something, then the police will know they got them. Initially, Bert Roberts, the 11-year-old, tells police he heard the commotion and found his mom unconscious when she came to, and then he witnessed the shooting, and that the final shot happened during the 911 call. The other two kids obviously were far too young to be able to talk to police, so it's really just what Bert and Tracy said happened because the only other person in the house is dead. That's all they have. They found no forced entry. Despite Tracy stating that these two men burst into the home with force, there was no evidence of that. None. There was also no forensic evidence at all to show that another person other than Dustin was in that house. But you do have the ligature marks around Tracy's neck to show that she was attacked. So that was enough to kind of show that Dustin was hired to kill her, potentially. He attacked her, but lost the fight. The biggest main inconsistency, though, was that Tracy said Dustin broke in and was certainly not invited to the house that day. However, Dustin's mom told police that that was a lie. Tracy had actually called earlier that day to literally ask Dustin to come over, but it wasn't enough to really prove anything. And like I said at the beginning, police work and investigations like this changed in the direct aftermath of 9/11. There just wasn't really enough to tell them to waste more resources on this case that appears to be a home invasion where a mother defends herself. So the case kind of just sits idle. Tracy and Michael's marriage, though, crumbles. She ends up filing a police report against Michael around 2004 claiming violence, saying he physically assaulted her, which of course was denied by him. He said that at one point he had to subdue her against a wall because she became extremely violent towards him. She made claims of him vandalizing her vehicle. None of this was ever actually proven. There weren't any like bruises or marks or anything either, but it all leads to a divorce. Michael then says his wife is lying about the Dustin Wehde case. He slowly began to see the sinister side of his wife, how very like nonchalant and flippant and almost calm she was about taking a person's life, despite the circumstances of it being like a home invasion type thing. It's still going to be pretty jarring, but she like never seemed to care. He started to see her violent outbursts get worse, and he then experienced them at firsthand, and then he realized his wife likely made up the intruder story, or, he believed that she did. He thinks she came up with the whole plot to get back at her ex husband, John, in order to get full custody of Bert. because right before this home invasion thing happened, the custody dispute was back. John was trying to reclaim the custody agreement that Tracy was not properly following. And then, bam, this big thing happens. Convenient, is it not? After the divorce, Tracy moves back with her parents and changes her last name back to Richter. Another custody battle ensues between her and Michael. Meanwhile, by 2009, times have changed. Life is basically going back to normal post 9/11, and investigators can finally take this second look at this case. Now, Dustin's mother had filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Tracy, which was later dropped only because the detective said it could hinder the investigation of this being a possible murder. So they go back to the house where all of this happened, and using crime scene photos and the dents and divots that are actually still in the floors and walls, they can reconstruct that what Tracy said happened didn't actually happen. Bullet trajectory and blood spatter tells a vastly different story, a scientific story that can only tell the truth because science doesn't lie. Initially, Tracy said only one shot was fired into Dustin as he was on the ground. However, it was now very evident that Dustin was shot numerous times in the back while he was already on the ground motionless. She also said the lights were off, and the lights were off when police arrived, and it was dark, of course. Tracy also needed glasses for most things, but if the lights were off and her glasses were off, she managed to be a remarkable shot because she connected on every single shot. She didn't miss, while apparently doing so while visually impaired in the dark during a supposed struggle, because she also said that when she shot him, there was that struggle where he was pulling her by the hair. And then, a woman named Mary Higgins breaks it all open when she tells police about a little spiral pink notebook. Mary Higgins was a close friend of Tracy at the time. She told police that shortly after the shooting, Tracy and her family went on this big several week long trip to Australia. When Tracy returned in February, Tracy told Higgins about the shooting, and she said, quote, like she was telling me her grocery list. She basically had no emotion to it. Tracy told her that she unloaded the gun as she was being pulled at by two intruders. She then got up and stepped over what she thought was dirty clothes to check on her kids. Tracy told Higgins she took the three children down the hall, and as they were going down the hall, there was a body there, and she told me that the body was moving. And she stood over him and said, quote, stop moving or I'll blow your fucking brains out. I will blow your head off, end quote. And she told me, Mary, he continued to move anyway, and that she stood over him and she fired the gun until he quit moving. Then they proceeded down the stairs. Mary Higgins will further tell police that Tracy's son Bert comes into the room while Tracy was relaying this story to Mary Higgins, and that Bert became extremely agitated. He began to bang his head against the table and stated, quote, why did you go up there? Why did you go back up there? You didn't have to shoot him. You didn't have to kill him, end quote. Mary Higgins further testifies that Tracy told her in that conversation that police found an older model computer and a pink spiral notebook in the car left in her driveway the night of the supposed home invasion. Tracy described to Mary the details of the contents of that pink notebook. Very detailed information, actually, which included contact information for her first husband, Dr. John Pittman, with whom Tracy, of course, was involved in a very heated custody dispute. Tracy told Mary the notebook would prove her ex husband was involved in this attempted murder. Tracy should not have known about that notebook. Police never told her husband, literally never told anyone. How did she know about its existence? And more importantly, how did she know what was written in the notebook she never should have known existed? Mary Higgins also told police that in a later interaction after this one, Tracy got angry with Mary and pointed her finger at her and said, quote, forget about the pink notebook, end quote. Now, the belief is that Tracy actually befriended Dustin in order to gain his confidence. She invited him over and gave him this notebook and somehow convinced him to, in his own handwriting, write down all of these notes about her ex-husband wanting to kill her and her son, to write down that he, Dustin, was hired to do the job. But don't worry, she probably said, this was all just going to be in writing. Nothing was actually going to happen. It was all just to get her ex in trouble. The question became, why would Dustin willingly go along with that? Well, the answer isn't known, and it never will be known, because the only person who can answer that was shot dead inside the Roberts home. She could have made passes at him. This was a 20-year-old young man after all. Maybe she promised him some type of sexual interaction. Maybe she promised him money. There's no any proof of money exchanged, but convincing him to write down some notes in a notebook isn't really all that far-fetched of an idea. He was this kind of loner, an outcast, and maybe he just welcomed being wanted for something. Nobody knows though. But this was not then, nor was it ever, Dustin's idea. This was not his plan. There was no second intruder. There was no break-in. Tracy lured this young man over to her house that night after getting him to put all this incriminating shit in a notebook in his handwriting for the purpose of staging a home invasion that's all allegedly planned by her angry ex-husband. Dustin did not realize how this would turn out for him, unfortunately. Dustin did not realize that he was a loose thread that could unspool this entire plot. So she had to kill him to make it all look believable. Tracy Richter is arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Dustin Wehde. At her trial, she continued to profess this was all self-defense. The ligature marks around her neck proved that she was attacked, except nobody actually witnessed it, only her. In part of Bert's testimony at the trial, he would say that night he was watching TV in his room when he heard his mom yelling for help from down the hall. After his mom was pulled away from the door to Bert's room, Bert said he heard banging around in the hallway. Bert reported hearing his mom making a very awful choking sound for several minutes. Then Dustin, who Bert actually knew from previous interactions, came to the bedroom door and threatened Bert. Later, Bert heard footsteps running away from his room, followed by yelling and several loud bangs. His mom then opened the door to Bert's room. Bert said her wrists were both like they were bound together with pantyhose. Bert then followed his mother, who had a gun in each hand now at this point. Bert said Dustin, who was now lying on the floor, started to move. Bert said he then heard his mother warn Dustin not to move, followed by a couple of shots. But when the prosecution cross-examined him, Bert would end up agreeing that his interview with police on the night of the shooting was actually the more accurate recall of the incident. In the police interview, which only happened just a couple of hours after all of this occurred, Bert said nothing about his mom being pulled away from his room, nothing about hearing banging and kicking noises in the hallway, and most importantly, he heard nothing about hearing choking noises. He did not see her being choked. Nor did Bert say in the interview that he saw Dustin moving or trying to get up, and he did not say that he heard his mom telling Wehde to stay down. Why would he lie on the stand about hearing his mom being choked and hearing this big commotion, knowing full well he said the complete opposite during the first police interview? I don't know why he would lie. Possibly to protect his mom. Perhaps his mom asked him to lie. I don't think there was any malicious intent, though, on his end, because remember, he was 11 years old when this happened, and this just suddenly happened. It was just like everything was quiet, and then boom, this all goes down. It all went by so fast. A kid is going to be in extreme shock. He's fearing for his life. He wants to protect his mom. He wants to protect his siblings. There's not going to be a whole lot of clear thinking going on in an 11-year-old's head. But it's also evident by Mary Higgins' testimony, who does testify against Tracy at the trial, that Bert was extremely distraught that his mother took time to go back and shoot Dustin, despite them at that point being quote unquote safe and in the clear. This clearly scarred him mentally. That's a lot of trauma to deal with. So I don't know if he intentionally lied or was just recalling what he thought might have happened that night after years of hearing stories, especially from his mom, because his mom is filling his head also with ideas in what really happened over the years. To me personally, Bert is just another victim of his mother, whether he knows it or not. Another thing I want to point out here, real quick, is the fact that Tracy said she was strangled with his ligature and that she had fallen unconscious. She passed out. My question there is, if Dustin was really sent there to murder her and Bert, when she was passed out, why not just kill her right then and there? Why not just officially subdue her for good and then go after Bert, knowing she can't do anything to protect him? So why on earth would they just subdue her and strangle her to pass out and then do nothing with her? That made absolutely no sense to me when I'm hearing her version of the events and what she's trying to claim happened by having her ex-husband orchestrate this whole thing to have her taken out of the equation for custody and all that. He would have had a quick, simple, easy opportunity right then and there to just kill her and finish it, but he didn't. So I don't know. That's also extremely suspicious about her story. In terms of the physical ligature marks, well, the defense would prove it is actually quite possible to inflict those wounds on yourself. The wounds were also not deep enough, they showed, to have caused her to black out, but they determined they were, in fact, self inflicted. All of this horror was orchestrated by Tracy Roberts to get back at her husband for simply wanting shared custody of Bert, and also to avoid paying a $1,000 child support payment every month. Because, money. She has a history of lying about abuse. She lied about her husband molesting her young boy, for God's sakes. What kind of person does that? Uses their own child as a disgusting pawn to get back at her husband for exposing her infidelity. At any rate, Tracy is found guilty of the first degree premeditated murder of Dustin Wehde and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And in the end, she lost all custody of all of her kids. The only time they can ever visit her now is by talking to her through several inches of glass inside the walls of a prison. Good job. She lost everything. I hope it was all worth it for her because she destroyed not only her family, but also the family of Dustin Wehde, a young man who was a quiet, nerdy, loner type guy who was used by a woman seeking some twisted revenge for a situation she also caused. He was an innocent pawn in all of this. He still had so much life left to live, so much potential and promise that would never come to be. But in the end, he did get justice, and I hope now that Dustin Wehde is resting in peace. But that is it for this case. True crime, Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. Hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you are new here, please follow or subscribe, whatever you do with podcasts. I'm not sure what the term is, but do that with this podcast, please. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. You can find, I believe my link tree is on my Spotify bio thing here, but I also try to put the link tree in the description of this podcast episode. So you can click on it. You'll see my TikTok links. You'll also find my YouTube link, which I would really love for you guys to follow. I tell long form true crime stories over there in video form. So please subscribe to that. Follow the TikTok. Follow the podcast. Also, if there's a case you want me to cover, just send me a really quick email. My email is listed also, I think, below. But if not, it's Mikey at truecrimer.com. Just send me the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened. I'll add that name to my list. I cannot promise you when I'll cover that case, but I will eventually get to it because I pick my cases that I cover at random. But that is it for this particular episode, True Crime Rooney. So until the next case, talk to you later. Is such an awkward way to say goodbye, but here we are anyway. So, okay. Bye.